And now I'm here in Taiwan, and well, what exactly am I? Am I Latin American? I'm definitely not Taiwanese. I'm not Chinese, really. And so it's just, if I were to ask my kids, I mean, my kids have like 3 passports, and what are they? They now live in Panama. They have Latin American names. They can speak Spanish, but they also speak Chinese. They grew up in Taiwan, but they're very westernized. So
I heard you say Chinese Panamanian.
Okay.
Panamanian.
Mm-hmm.
So you do that rather than saying Panamanian Chinese. I mean, in terms of your identity.
In the U.S., you have this concept of Chinese American.
Yeah, but right? For me,
or
sometimes
ABC,
I'll say,
sometimes
I'll say I'm American Chinese, rather than Chinese American. So I'm thinking, is it because of how we identify ourselves more or not? I mean, for example, Panama, they don't have an accepted way of saying whether you're Panamanian Chinese or Chinese Panamanian.
It depends on the context. So actually, that is one interesting thing, because I was in Panama until I went away to college. Mm-hmm. So in Panama, I always thought of myself as Chinese. Like you're just Chino. You're not. This concept of Chinese Panamanian didn't exist. Like, I always grew up in Panama, even though I'm third generation, and my parents were born in Panama. I only spoke Spanish, and learned a little bit of English little by little. I always thought of myself as Chinese growing up in Panama, because maybe this is before all these politics of culture and identity and so forth. So in Panama, people would just call me "Hey Chino," like that's just. That was just who you were. Like, you were, you're not. I wasn't a hyphen, right? It was more, you're Chinese, even though I've never been there. It's just, I think also Panamanians are also more relaxed, but also more explicit about race and ethnicity, because they're. Like if you're white, it's one kind of Panamanian, and if you're sort of brown, you're one kind of Panamanian, and if you're black, and also it was a different time.
People would call you Chino.
Yeah,
I mean, in that way, it wasn't any kind of derogatory thing, because in the States, if you say chink, or it sounds like Chino, I mean, it's not very nice way of saying. So was that didn't have any kind of negative connotation in that way in Panama?
I mean, it depends how you say it. Sometimes it can be like this affectionate thing, and that's how Panamanian culture is. Panamanian culture is very sort of informal. I mean, there's still a little bit of that, but it depends how you say it. Like, I remember when I was in high school, I had this friend that I went to go visit, and my dad came to pick me up, and then my friend's brother came over, and he started saying, "Hey Chino, come do this. Hey Chino, come do that." And my dad was a little bit, wait, why is he talking that way? He was like, wait, what's going on? Why is he talking to you that way? But it actually turned out that he was talking to his brother, because my friend, even though he was sort of like this white Panamanian, he happened to have a little bit smaller eyes, and so his whole nickname, his entire life, is Chino. Even though he wasn't actually Asian. And he was actually talking to his brother, but my dad got confused. He was like, wait, why is he calling you Chino? So it's like, because the culture is a bit more informal. So you could like call a white person Chino his whole life, and that's his nickname. My parents, they spent their social life was sort of built around, even though they were also born in Panama, their social life was sort of built around relatives and like some of these Chinese associations. And so in all the events and all the, birthday parties and like Christmas parties, I was always surrounded by Asian Chinese Panamanians who I thought were other Chinese. And then, I had some friends who were Panamanian, but actually most of my friends were. So I sort of always grew up conscious of the identity.
Right.
But I didn't also realize that it is actually so different from actually being Chinese, like from mainland China or Taiwan. Right. I then went to college in the U.S. And then got introduced to this whole concept of Chinese American, Chinese Panamanians, and then sort of
interesting.
what that sort of means, and the fact that, oh yeah, I'm actually this weird, like I'm not Chinese, because then I met actual Chinese people and I'm like, oh, I don't really.
Yeah, you're not like.
I have nothing in common with you, really.
Yeah.
Like, well, not a lot. Like, the first time I came to Asia for work, there was this sort of like, I never thought about it. Like there was this weird shock of like, oh my God, everybody looks like me. Because I was taught growing up as a minority of, you just grew up to that. You kind of recognize Asian people and you pick them out because that's who you are, or how you're taught who you are. And then, but you're still a minority, right? Even in the US, right? Like but now it's like everybody's like that. And it was this weird, like cognitive, like, and now I'm here in Taiwan and, well, what exactly am I? Am I Latin American? I'm definitely not Taiwanese. I'm not Chinese, really.
Yeah.
And so it's
You're a mixed up kid. No.
Yeah, very, very mixed up. Yeah. And
no, I mean,
and if I were to ask my kids, I mean, my kids have like 3 passports, and what are they? They now live in Panama. They have Latin American names. They can speak Spanish, but they also speak Chinese. They grew up in Taiwan. But they're very westernized. So like.
Yeah. So 3 passports are Panamanian, Taiwanese passport.
Yeah.
And do they have American passport?
And at some point they had a Hong Kong passport.
A Hong Kong passport also. Oh, okay.
But we're working on more passports, trying to get opportunities.
You really want them to be multicultural.
Yeah, I grew up, always conscious of, what, that passports and residences open up opportunities for you, right? Like it was, even though we were financially probably okay, it was always like, oh, we got to figure out a way to get a U.S. green card. You got to figure out a way to immigrate to the U.S. somehow. And so, going to the U.S. at that time, right?
Yeah, at that time,
was the dream.
Right.
So that's why you went to go study there and then try to get a job and try to get a green card. Maybe now, I don't know, it's still, something that we're sort of trying to negotiate.
Yeah, it's just interesting how things change too, because like, for example, I always thought, oh yeah, U.S. passport gets me so many different places, and I would always do that. But nowadays, since I got my Taiwan passport, depending on where I'm traveling, only about the current situation with the U.S. and what's going on in the world, I will use my Taiwan passport rather than my U.S. passport, because working abroad for so many years, you just hear people's comments about Americans, in a lot of different ways that are not necessarily always really positive. I feel like now, in terms of identity, it was all mixed up before, and now I've kind of settled into the fact that now I live in Taiwan again. I'm embracing both parts of my culture, whereas I didn't before. So I really like to say that one of my friends kind of opened up my eyes, or opened up my heart in a way, when she told me, I always thought I was half-half. Now, which half? I'm half American, half Asian. It's just, and then she told me one time, Sharon, you're 100% American, you're 100%, Chinese or Taiwanese. So you're actually a 200% person.
I sort of love that sort of mix of you have sort of this seriousness and responsibility and dedication of that comes with the Asian background, but it's also sort of a bit more the informality and the warmth of Latin American culture.
Yeah.
So, and I kind of wanted my kids to experience that too. And so, my children were born here in Taiwan, but earlier this year we actually moved them to Panama to go to finish their high school there.
Wow. You said that they speak Spanish, they speak Mandarin.
Yeah,
they
so
speak
so they were born here, but I had read that it's good to raise kids with as many languages as possible.
Yeah.
So for the first years of their life, I only spoke to them in Spanish.
Oh.
And their mom only spoke to them in Chinese. And so, it was this household, and at the time I still don't fully speak Chinese, and she didn't speak any Spanish. But, you know, it was like this household where, like, you know, I would like say something to my son in Spanish, and then he would repeat that in Chinese to his mom.
Yeah.
And then it would kind of go back and forth. And then, you know, I was told, and it was actually true, that like kids who grew up that way actually learn to speak later than monolingual kids. Because it you know, it's a little bit harder for the brain to but when they do, they'll do it a little bit later. So some people get scared. They're like, oh my God, I'm like ruining my kid because he's not talking because I'm confusing him.
Right, but if you think about it, you know, for them to be able to just translate in their head and speak in the other language, I feel like that is so cool. You know,
it is, but it is harder. But apparently, I think they've shown studies that it actually makes their brain, like it raises their IQ beyond just knowing the languages a little bit higher. Because apparently, like early on, they have to then basically learn to distinguish the cues and what language is what language. And like they, you know, it was interesting because like even from when he was like maybe like 1.5 years old, my son could translate. But he didn't really, I think, fully understand the concept of languages. He just knows that this is mom's language. This is how I talk to mom. This is how I talk to dad.
Right.
And just basically automatically switch between the two. And he would only mix them when, like, when he didn't know exactly the word. But kids are very, very good at, like, their brains are so plastic that they can, like, kids kids, you only mention a word to them once. I was really shocked because they would talk to me in Spanish and then realize, wait, where did you even learn that word? And he could only have learned it from me because I was the only person that could speak to him in Spanish. But like, mom must have mentioned that word once because it was like such a rare word. But like, you know, he just threw it back at me. Yeah.
So when did you guys introduce English into their life? I mean,
that just kind of sneaked in, you know, because then they start going to like kindergarten and then they started learning English. And then we had a helper who spoke English. Unfortunately, once they switched to English, then they just like, oh, well, English. Everybody here speaks English. I'm just going to speak English. And so unfortunately, I wasn't, in retrospect, I should have just stuck to the Spanish, but they would speak to me in English and I would respond back to them in English.
You couldn't do the switch. They speak to you in English and then you respond back to them in Spanish.
I should have tried that, and apparently that's successful in some people. But, you know, already kids don't listen to you all the time.
The fact that they can speak Mandarin, I think, I mean, just because of the way the world is, being able to speak Chinese is really valuable in terms of what they're going to do. In the future.
Well, they have the top three in the world.
The
top three languages in the world are Spanish, English, and Chinese.
Yeah, that's true.
There was this funny story there. One of the first times I took my kids back to Panama to visit their grandparents, we were, I think we were like a year and a half old. We went on I took him to the park, and then we were walking down the park, and then at one point my this other kids kind of run through our group, and he's like, Dad, oh my God, those kids, they can speak Spanish too. And this is in Panama, because he hadn't realized that this was another language. He just thought this was like our secret language.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please like, share, and subscribe.